back, everybody, to another episode of Podcast Noir. It has been a while, almost 9 months, in fact, since we have recorded an episode of the podcast, but we're back. We're determined to bring you more content, and in order to do that, I have once again enlisted the help of my co-host, Plebleius, and we have brought...
Hello.
Yeah, hi. And we have brought GTX Savage back on the show as well.
Just Savage will do.
Just Savage.
Just whatever you want to call me. Hit me up with the Twitters, though.
Hit me up.
That's why that GTX is important.
Yeah, make sure to quote tweet, call him out for anything he says on the show that you don't like. Let him know what you think. I'm sure he will appreciate the interaction. So, we have one topic for you on the show today and a brief section before that. We are going to talk about the Strong Legs ban. Before we hop into that, anything else you guys want to bring up? Any news? Any thoughts? Happy to be here.
Scott Pruitt quit.
Okay, hold on. This isn't a politics show.
Nah.
Well, maybe
Could be
it
if you
is.
want it to be.
Could be if you want it to be. So,
I mean, if we're bringing up Strong Legs, I think you're wanting it to be, and that's probably where I'll just leave the opener.
well, I don't know how much politics comes into this. I will put this up in the this topic up in the third spot. Twit longer. It's actually really hard to see, huh? So basically, for those of you who don't know, Strong Legs is a streamer. He casts CS:GO matches, and he makes his living streaming. And he has received a 30-day ban from Twitch for hate conduct. So you can. I'm not going to say on stream what he said, but you can see in his twit longer that he had said some inflammatory things in a moment of frustration, and it was clipped by another streamer who wanted the attention, and not in a bad way. Sorry, I don't want to make that sound like he was like attention hungry. But anyway, if you have a big streamer and you kill him on stream, right? You're gonna like clip that and be like, oh, look, I killed so-and-so, right? We've done it. We screenshotted in PUBG, Tyler.
Oh yeah, when we destroyed Trick 2G and his buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's not an uncommon thing to do. But the clip went viral, and it did feature Strong Legs saying the statement that I had highlighted above. So I just wanted to know what your guys' thoughts are on whether or not you think a 30-day ban was warranted for this behavior. Go
Savage,
ahead.
want to start us off?
Yeah, Savage, go ahead.
Sure. I think one of the first things that I want to say is that I don't think that really any response from Twitch is necessarily unwarranted. I mean, they're a company who wants to portray a certain image. If you're a partner with them, I really don't see the issue for whatever punishment that they find necessary if you're not following their terms of service, right?
I agree. Agreed.
Well, I would like to put a little stipulation in here. So what do you guys think about the fact that this isn't a targeted thing, right? So he did not know the person he was addressing when he used the inflammatory word, right? He simply said it in a moment of frustration. It was not meant in a malicious or harmful way. Does context matter? Pleb, what do you think?
Well, in the context of what Savage was saying, it does seem to very clearly go against the hateful conduct policy on Twitch, which specifically says, quote, hateful conduct is any content or activity that promotes, encourages, or facilitates discrimination, denigration, objectification, harassment, or violence based on the following characteristics is strictly prohibited. It has a whole list, and one of them is sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it's not specifically targeted, it does seem pretty clear that it is in violation of Twitch's policy. So going with what Savage said, then at the very least, it doesn't seem like Twitch is in the wrong for deciding.
The only thing that I think I have to say about that is that it's really hard for me because I'm torn in kind of two different directions when I think about things like this, because like, do I think that he should be using language like that, especially on stream when you're a professional? Like, no, we talk about this a lot, like colloquially. I don't think that is something that he should be doing when he's streaming, even if he's going to talk to his friends like that. Like, he can be a dick off stream or whatever you want to do, right? But at least on stream, you know, like, contain yourself. I mean, it would be better if we all were better people in private as well, right? But the point that I'm trying to make is that, like, the context matters as well, though, because he's not specifically. I don't think in the way that he used it, like the language that he was using was specifically targeting. Like, I know that certain words have come to, like, people identify with certain words, and then people use those words negatively in order to, like, cause hateful scenarios. But the context in which he's saying it doesn't seem, it's not specifically targeted as like a hate speech, quote unquote, because we can debate on the context of that, but it doesn't seem hate speechy, right? Like, it's just a word, and how that word is charged, I think, can mean a lot about what is going on.
Well, I kind of agree, but and it's like the same way. So like what PewDiePie said back on his stream a while ago, that a lot of people angry. It's kind of the same thing, right? Like, he wasn't intentionally attacking somebody, but it still causes an outroar because it's. I mean, it is a word that is associated with hateful behaviors, and in this case, it's not as charged. Like, the word is not nearly as negative as that one. That one's basically the worst one you could say, but it's in the same vein in that by using it as a slur, you're still slandering that group of people. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I'm 100% with you there. It's definitely using it in a negative way does imply some sort of denigration, and yeah, I'm 100% on board with that. I think it's an incredibly unfortunate circumstance. There's probably no other way it could turn out. Of course, I believe he has appealed or is attempting to, but at the end of the day, it's one of those harsh situations in life. There isn't always a good answer.
Well, I have one quick question to ask to you guys,
Sure.
Before we move on, because I don't actually necessarily agree with it. If you say something like I agree with the sentiment that you guys are trying to make, for sure. I definitely agree with that. But for instance, so okay, let me try to construct this from two sides. So if you have a word that a certain demographic of people start to adapt. So let's say that, like, just for whatever reason, like, all lumberjacks started identifying under a certain word, right? Or, like, if you wanted to take it, like, to... Sorry, I kind of muted myself there. If you want to take it to the extreme, you could say, like, let's say that all gay people start identifying under a new word. Instead of gay, like, they just start, like, a completely different word, right?
Okay.
So if somebody uses that word in a negative context, you know, like 30 years from now, or this is why it's so difficult to construct, because it's not a perfect line, because you can't.
I think I get where you're going, but yeah, I can see what you're struggling.
But I'm struggling to make the connection fully. But it's one of those things where I don't. It's like, if a word is adopted by certain people, does it instantly mean that whenever you use it, it in a negative way, that it's going to be hateful?
It just depends, I believe, in the manner in which it's said. So, for example, like the word here, because it does have an actual definition. Like, queer means strange. But when you say, like, what a queer, you're saying, like you're using it as a slur. You're not using it to say, like, oh, that's so strange. You are, by the context of how you're using it, associating it with a group of people, even if, like, that's not directly. You're not saying, like, oh, this guy is gay and therefore I don't like him. like you're using a word that has become associated with a specific group of people in a negative sense as a way to attack somebody. So it's a little complicated, but like yeah, like so if like gay people started associating with a different word and then maybe it has a negative connotation already and you start using it in that way, it doesn't necessarily mean it's like denigrating that group. But if you start using it in a negative way that intrinsically associates it with that group of people, then it is. And I mean, it's hard to come up with a specific example that doesn't already exist because
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That was where I was failing to draw a line with what I was trying to set up. But yeah, no, I think I agree with that. I think that it's important when shifts happen in like naturally. So, for instance, I think that the only way that people use like gay and queer, at least for the most part now, is ironically. Like they say it as like when you use it in like a hateful way, quote unquote. It's like irony, right? But I understand that everybody should probably move past that, other than, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It should probably it's been long enough now that we've been using it ironically other than seriously. 'Cause you remember in elementary school when all your friends would say like, "Oh, that's so gay," or you know what I mean?
yeah.
And then people kind of moved past that and now only say it ironically. And I think it's even time to just do away with it.
Well, I would agree.
Not saying the word is one way to solve the problem. And we are at about 11 minutes into the show, so I suggest we move on to our primary topic for the day, which is the Counter-Strike Professional Players Association. Recently announced and formed, formally, that is. So, for those of you who are completely out of the loop, Scott Smith, who goes by Scoots, or Sir Scoots on Twitter, has been working with players and a couple people in the industry to try to form a professional players association for Counter-Strike for about the last year, and they are finally ready to move forward. They have a proposed list of board members, they have dedicated legal counsel, and they have a director as well. And they have about 90 players or so that are going to be signed up, and we don't know exactly who is on that list yet, but probably more people will be joining as the scene continues to grow and develop, and this player association starts to display its value. Now, on to the value of the Players Association. I want to know, let's start off with you, Publius. What do you think is the net benefit of having a Players Association? Do you think it's a good thing on the whole for the entire industry, or do you think it's a bad thing?
I think it's a great thing. I mean, I've always been a fan of collective bargaining, and so just expanding that into an industry that's kind of struggled as far as player representation, especially in contracting, I think this is going to only be a good.
What about you, Savage? Soundbite?
I mean, I have a few questions.
Sure.
I think before we just say, yeah, players associations are a good thing. I think number one, there's a few, so at least one off the top of my head that I can think of situations that I question whether it's a good idea, like the LCS, the NALCSPA. I don't know if I necessarily would say yet that has been a great thing. I mean, it's relatively new still, right?
Do you
I don't follow League.
Background on that, just for anyone who's not familiar?
Well, okay, so and this kind of leads into some of the questions that I have. So let me establish the overall questions first, and then like maybe we can go into a couple specifics. Like I was just trying to use that as an example of one for the question. So the question is it set up properly? Because I don't think that they're just blanketly a good thing overall. I think that the setup is important. The second question is, are there any conflicts of interest, which is part of one of the problems that I have with the LCS Players Association. And number three is what influences do the players actually have once the association is formed? Like, what are these organizations actually accomplishing? So, like in the case of the LCS, like them setting up this players association, like what does it actually do for them?
I think to some extent that has yet to be seen. I do have up on screen an example of what it has perhaps not been able to accomplish for the players. You guys can view that link in the Google document as well. So you can see that there has been some uproar because there is a player that was traded in the NALCS onto a bench, and it was against his will to be transferred in that manner. So for a lot of people from coming from traditional sports, this seems like a very strange idea that a player can have no input into a decision like that, where he gets moved onto a roster. He's sitting on the bench. He's not playing. He may be getting paid, but at the end of the day, he doesn't have the ability to market himself or his skills and produce value for himself in the industry, and he might be locked in a bad situation that could potentially lead to the end of his career. And the NALCS has had a player organization, but it's a little strange because it was organized by Riot, who manages the game, obviously, that the NALCS pros play on, right? Which brings up a huge conflict of interest. How can you have something that was created and that has lawyers working for it, that are also working for Riot, trying to get the fair shake for the players, right? There's not complete independence from the people that manage and run the game and the league that they play in.
Yeah, I think that's probably my biggest issue, is not necessarily because they put it so well in like their PR release, right? They're like, okay, well, eventually the players are going to take over all of the stuff. Like they'll take over the funding, they'll take over all that, which is like all good stuff. Mm-hmm. But the part that is weird is, do they have control over who their actual lawyers are, like who their representation as lawyers are, or is that just always going to be Riot's lawyer?
Yeah, questions like that.
That's a good question. Well, with the Riot thing, I definitely soundbites over. Like the Riot thing, definitely in my mind is very sketchy. Basically, when it comes down to it, like the player union, there's three different competing interests. There's the players, there's the teams, and there's the league. And when you have the players' interests being represented by one of the other interests, they have no bargaining power against that. So with Riot controlling the players' union then loses that leverage against Riot.
Yeah, and it's also
sorry.
No, it's also very strange. Yeah, if you can imagine that, in essence, it's collective bargaining against yourself, which, it just does not work. There's a flaw in logic there, and I don't know why they wouldn't set up a sustainable system in the first place that was independent and run, paid for, and managed by players, right? And people that the players, they did elect their own player management, right? So they have their official representatives to the NALCS were elected by the players, but questions like this player who was traded onto a bench is like, so what is that accomplishing? If you have a representative, how did something like this happen? And who's going to fight for this player's rights?
Well, you're exactly right. That's kind of where it fails to answer the question exactly what it does. I mean, they're representatives to Riot, and so they can change what? They just go to Riot and say, well, this is kind of what the players think, and then what does Riot do about it? Like, they have no incentive to do anything about anything that the players say. So, for instance, like, so the Counter-Strike Pro Players Association.
Yeah.
So far, it's being managed by the Danish what is it? I had it up. It's the Danish Elite Athletes Association. They're partnered with them.
Yeah.
And so it's an organization that they manage the professional Danish sports,
Yeah.
like all of them, and so they have a lot, and they're independent of the any government entities, anything like that.
Now I
And
thought I read that they like also like cooperated with like international sports organizations for like soccer, and is that true?
I think you're correct.
They are both Michael. I don't know how to say it. Due, I think. I don't know. I'm probably butchering that. And Mads Uland. Both of those guys are probably they're on a football players association as well for Denmark. I don't know about internationally. It's possible. Obviously, the lawyer probably has other clients that he's working for, right? So he has probably represented other sports franchises, players, things like that, and has expertise in the industry. But yeah, I did read that the partnership with the Danish Elite, the DEAA, not just the DEA, DEAA. They're going to get a lot of experience, know-how, and negotiation, and just a lot of support probably from that partnership, which I think is a good thing.
Well, the lawyers are independent, and I think what they
Yeah.
specifically said they were focusing on is a lot of contract negotiations, specifically in obviously it's Counter-Strike.
Yeah.
Because we've seen and we've commented on colloquially about a lot of the Counter-Strike trades that have happened. I mean, for instance, like it was rumored that and it was said later that this wasn't true, but it was a very high number. I think that Simple and Flamey's buyout was rumored to be 800K, and everybody's like, "Oh, that's super high." But then it comes out that Apex and NBK's is that high. If you were to buy both of those players, it would be an $800,000 buyout.
Yeah.
Which is just absolutely ridiculous. Like, these players are in a scenario where their team is like just benched them, right? And they're just sitting there.
Yeah, buyouts are a pretty egregious example of how contracts can go wrong, because any player, when they sign a contract, that's probably the last thing they're worried about. And indeed, with the Simple buyout, that one was especially strange because it wasn't even clear if it was in the contract as to he had a set buyout number, right? Because Navi and ES Force, their controlling interest, were stalling and then saying like, "Oh, well, if you buy him out, we still won't give him to you until July," and all sorts of weird stuff that's like, how could this legally happen? But it does, and that's the industry that we are currently living in, where it's just every man for himself. And so one thing I do want to bring up here, because I think I have a big disagreement with Publius on this, which is going to be over the collective bargaining portion, right? So as of right now, I don't know of any instance or modus operandi that CSPPA have for collectively bargaining on behalf of all of their members. There might be some sort of so in terms of what the CSPPA is supposed to be doing right now is very much tailored to individuals, right? Because we have wildly different levels of skill, and people's value in the market is so crazily different that it's hard to make a lot of collective statements like that. So I think right now it's more based around just trying to get people fair representation for themselves, and not necessarily bargaining as a collective. And I'm actually concerned that if that does start happening, bargaining as a collective, that this something like CSPPA could actually cause irreparable harm to a fragile industry, right? We don't have millions and millions of dollars floating around in the industry that, tournament organizers and people that run leagues can just absorb if the CSPPA started making demands of them, right?
So like, I'm not really sure what you're getting at with this. Are you saying that like? So you're saying if the CSPPA started actually like exercising collective bargaining
Hmm.
power, that they could completely destroy CS:GO as an esport?
I'm saying they could not destroy, cause irreparable harm. So, for instance, cause a decline, or perhaps make it so that a tournament organizer does no longer wants to work with Counter Strike, right? Because if they get in a showdown with the CSPPA, they may end up just walking away from the table, right? And it would be a real shame to see somebody like ESL say, hey, we're not going to run CSGO tournaments anymore. Um, the players were asking for too much, and we can't run a profitable event. Because, I mean, already tournament organizers are not making, lots of money, right? It's already,
Right.
and so that's what I'm saying is it's like if the CSPPA goes too far on something, they do have a serious possibility of causing a lot of damage.
Well, I mean, it's called collective bargaining for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
If the CSPPA pushes too far and they end up like, so say using ESL as an example, if they drove ESL away from the table, that impacts the players too. They lose money if they can't compete in events, and so it's about reaching compromises.
I have a couple things to say about both of those things. So first off, I actually don't think that the players are that
Incentivized for the avenues that they compete in. The actual money that the players receive from competing is very, very minimal in comparison to the amount that they're making from their contracts and their sponsorships. So it's a I think it's an issue actually of like the developer based leagues versus grassroots leagues. Like I think it could be a problem specifically in Counter Strike because Valve isn't going to stop it, or maybe they'll do something, but it's like they don't really have that much power because the thing is that these players are signing contracts with organizations that aren't running the events and that aren't they aren't involved in the circuits. Like all they're involved in is the players. Whereas in the case of like take the LCS for example, like let's say that there was a player formed union that wasn't formed by Riot and was actually set up correctly, the collective bargaining becomes a lot more, I think, valuable for the players, and I also think it becomes less encroaching for the scene because Riot can make any decisions that they want, but they understand how much power that the players have to affect their bottom line. Whereas it's not Valve and it's not Counter-Strike. You know what I mean? Like it's different.
I think I get what you're going. Yeah.
Because the organizers aren't Valve. And so nobody's going to keep the organization in check, right? The player formed organization.
Yeah, so that is interesting. That is an extra step that I didn't think about. The fact that there are actual independent venues.
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and things like things like sponsors and stuff. So for instance, this is a big one, right? So what if CSPPA said in contracts for players from now on, we are no longer going to we're going to make it so that the players can use whatever peripherals they want when they play, and teams can't force you to use a sponsor's product, right? So, I know that's something that sometimes is really difficult because, like, if you're sponsored by Razer, right? If your team is sponsored by Razer and they want you to use Razer keyboards, Razer mice, I'm not trying to say that Razer is terrible, but they're definitely not the best, right? And when you're trying to maintain a competitive advantage and you're trying to win, there's a weird conflict there where the team needs to make money, right? And to some extent, that actually it's easier for them to make money through a sponsorship than it is saying that our team is going to be the best. We're going to go to tournaments and get all the prize money. because that's very inconsistent, unreliable, right? You would never want to gamble like that as a business owner. But CSPPA could come along and put in an addendum like this, and all of a sudden there goes a revenue stream for orgs. And you could say that, yes, this might not be in the player's interests, but perhaps that doesn't affect them overnight until, well, 6 months from now, another org decides to leave the Counter-Strike scene, right?
Well, I mean,
Well,
you can say. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, well, like in that specific instance, and in instances like that, like I view collective bargaining against the team organizations as a lot more effective than against the actual esports hosting organizations. So, like in a case like that, like say it's Virtus Pro or something, they can say like, if this is a demand that the CSPPA is going to enforce, we're not going to recruit CSPPA players. And then like that, because that then cuts off a revenue stream for players that were interested in going to Virtus Pro or whatever team it happens to be.
Well, yeah, but if they're, so for instance, let's take VP for example. Let's say that the talent in Poland, 8 out of the 10 players and the top 10 in Poland are CSPPA members. What do you do then? Do you get the 2 that aren't and then hope they're already on your team and you don't have to buy them out, and then try and get 3 additional players?
Well,
from
players
the
can
Polish
leave the
scene?
CSPPA at any time, right? And so it's one of those things that
Sure.
if VP is offering, like, okay, VP is a great example actually, because let's say that all of them, or let's say they didn't want to, like they have the highest contracts right now in Counter-Strike from what I know. As far as I know, they offer the most money, or at least they did,
They're close.
like a year ago. Like the VP players'
think-
contracts are insane.
I think
And
based
so
on-
that's kind of my point. Is it's like if the VP players are getting offered double the contract salary of the Cloud9 players, right? Like if Cloud9 wanted to pick up a Polish org or like or a Polish team for whatever reason, because like the 5 best players in Poland don't want to play for VP, but then also you have, let's say you have another, let's take a third org into the equation. Let's say that like who's somebody over there, like Avangar or something, right? Says, okay, we aren't going to take CSPPA players either, but we'll offer the same contract that whoever else is offering, that or double the or whatever you want to offer, right? Like it's up to the orgs then at that point.
Sure.
That they can offer whatever they want, and the players don't have to be signed or whatever, because they're not obligated to go with the CSPPA for their representation.
No, you're absolutely right, but I mean, you have to ask that. I mean, how is the math going to add up in those scenarios when, like, how can a team offer the same amount to a player but have less sponsorship as an organization, right? Like cutting off one of their potential revenue streams, right? Or
Well, so in this specific example, VP would say like, we're going to keep our sponsor, and that's why we're not going to hire.
Right. That's why
or
we're not.
Sure.
CSPPA.
Exactly.
Sure, and then those salaries go to people that, are not CSPPA, and there'd be stress on them. That's true, but then wouldn't that also mean that the CSPPA is getting degraded and is ineffective at doing its job? I guess that's
Not necessarily. I like if the players actually think that is in their best interest, then no. Like the it's doing its job.
Mhm.
So as a
And-
very real world example, think of it like a coal strike. In this case, VP would be like the coal company, and they might bring in scabs to like try and fill the jobs, maybe even pay them 3 or 4 times as much to try and cut out the unions from striking. And it's up to the players at that point to commit to the collective bargaining agreement, and that's where. So like in this example, it's kind of extreme because it almost is like a strike. But that's where the power of the CSPPA comes in, is that they can say, all right, you can do that. We're, as a collective, not going to play for you. And that might mean you're left with worse talent. And,
Sure.
and that's
But
kind
but
of where
there's also
collective bargaining comes in.
There's also no, but Savage brought this up earlier though. are not bound to stay in the CSPPA, right? So
Well,
that's,
and so it's completely on the player base then to commit. Like
yeah.
that's kind of the drawback of collective bargaining is that
Well, and that's also the drawback that
You're-
this isn't a true union, right? In the sense that every Counter-Strike Pro isn't automatically a member, right? And
Well, if they
Well,
do, they have to pay. Don't they have to pay for like the collective representation, basically?
yeah, so the players are all fronting a
Yeah,
little
so
bit of money
that's
to pay for
their
this.
that's their incentive too. It's like you're paying for this.
well even well until recently you're right, but just last week they made that Supreme Court case in the U.S. where you can't be forced to pay union dues if you don't
Yeah.
want to be a member of the union.
Yeah, I know, and that's
Which
Oh, I'm not saying that they're forced
Whole nother-
to, but it's
no,
like
no. We're just kind
right.
of
Yeah. It's one of those things where if you're a player and you've been represented by the CSPPA, and as far as you're concerned, it's been doing its job and you've been paying into it, like the fact that you would just go out of it for a high contract or whatever, it seems against human nature to me.
generally people like to band together, and that's why unions generally work.
Yeah, that's kind of my point. Is I think it's way against human nature if you have a good experience in an organization like that and they've represented you well in the past, and yeah.
And then I mean, essentially, like your peer group would then also be turning on you, right?
Oh yeah, that's what I was just
That's-
gonna say too. Is that like
probably
you
an
might
enormous amount of social pressure.
the CSPPA might then say like you are now like we will not let you come to any CSPPA sponsored organizations or like events, like to those players specifically, and like they might try. Well, and then that I guess kind of brings up the thing you brought up with like ESLs. They might try and strong arm ESL into preventing those players from showing up.
Oh yeah.
Which
yeah,
I mean-
only teams with all CSPPA members can play in this tournament.
Well, honestly, that seems to be something that someone would want to do eventually,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And so
'Cause
that's why it concerns me in grassroots, because CS, like, even though it's huge, like it's still a grassroots esport. Like the scene is not run by Valve. Like it's supported lightly by Valve.
Okay, so let me ask, what's the actual incentive for these tournament venues? Because like you said, they don't make a ton of profit. What's their
They have
incentive for
to.
actually?
I
running?
actually disagree with that you said that they don't make a lot of profit. I think that might have been the case in the past. I sincerely don't think that's the case.
Because
now.
I feel like what else are they running
So-
the events for?
So this is third-hand knowledge, but if you, it's brought up regularly on Richard Lewis's show, right? Where, and Thorne will talk about this too, right? Where from people they talk to, right? The sort of napkin, back of the napkin calculations, on how much these places make, and the people that work there, the ballpark figures for how much these tournament organizers actually make. It's not a killing, right? Obviously, I think most of them are profitable, but it's not like they're. I mean,
So what's the incentive?
for those businesses?
Yeah.
That's
Like
a
what's
good question.
Intel's long-term strategy for IEM? Like if it's not profitable, because okay, that one is the one that makes the least sense to me out of all of them.
That one's the one that makes the most sense to me because that's associating a brand with the tournament, right? So
And
No,
Intel's so large that they
it's
can.
it's
eat
like
any-
it's like a premier partnership, right? So Intel Extreme Masters, like, buy our CPUs, we put on cool esports events, right? It's like Red
Right,
Bull,
I-
it's like Red Bull sponsoring all those extreme sports.
I get that, but it's only a tournament for like one. I'm not saying because of the partnership or whatever, or like the branding or anything. I'm saying like it's a one game type of tournament, or like a very limited. It's like DreamHack is the scenario that makes perfect sense to me. You have a bunch of really, really popular games that are all voted on by the community, basically.
Sure.
And those games come, everybody pays to come see them. Like it's a perfect business model, because it's like the thing of like it's really hard to own like
I don't know if you guys have ever heard this, but or if it's just like something that I've always heard around. But it's like it's really hard to own like 2 or 3 Burger Kings, but it's really easy to own 30 or 40 Burger Kings, right? So it's like with DreamHack, it's like it's really hard to make a profitable tournament with just 1 or 2 games, but it's really easy to make a profitable tournament with 25 games.
Sure, and I kind of see what you're
That's
saying.
why IEM is like why I brought that up is like kind of a weird one, but it's like
Well,
I don't know how they couldn't make money.
Well, there's just the trade-offs there, right? I mean, but how they couldn't make money? Well, I mean, venues aren't cheap, and probably
Well, their marketing team has to also think it makes them money, right? That's kind of my point. Like for IEM,
see, I've actually had huge questions for a long time about companies and how they spend money in their marketing budgets. One Cam Monk asks, "Hey, we got James in the chat, boys."
Sure, like I definitely agree with you on that point, but what I'm saying is that point aside, like Intel's marketing team has to have decided, right, at some point down the line, like, yeah, this sells us more CPUs or whatever, whatever you want to call it, like whether it's Intel or whether it's some other company or
In the end, they have to decide they get some sort of return on their investment.
Sure, and I mean, maybe their return on investment, and I thought this about Intel for a long time, is I think they just want to be known as, if you want to play games, you buy our CPUs. And
Totally.
that's the culture they cultivate. And yeah, they probably factor this in, but we're getting a little bit away from the actual topic at hand, right? So whether or not, okay, so I guess the point is, if these tournaments did make a ton of money, right, then the players should probably be getting a little more back from the event, right? We should be seeing, better accommodations. We should be seeing things like, one of the most common ones I think I've heard is, as far as from players, is them showing up to the venue and not having, or the hotel, and not having an area to practice, right? So,
Right,
so for instance, like if you have at the hotel that the players are staying at, say you have a conference room there, and then players can log on to PCs that are set up in the hotel's conference room and not have to travel, 45 minutes across town or 30 minutes to get to a venue to then, set up, and it's like a whole big time sink, right? Just to, play the game and warm up or work on strats or go home and watch demos, right? So
yeah, I think that those things are important. I think that tournament organizers already do a ton for players. I think that here's the problem, and I'll relate it back to the main topic, is I don't think that a player organized body are the people to be bargaining with tournament organizers. I think that is the organization's jobs.
Well,
because okay, so hold on. I think that the tournament organizer's job is to put on the best tournament possible, not to put on the best player standard. And like I agree that they should have practice areas, like all those things. Obviously, like the tournament has enough money for it.
So that's the thing.
But
like if the tournament...
I don't think that the players should be the ones that are sitting here deciding these things, because they don't like. It's not the tournament's job to make sure that the players are represented well or paid well or any of that stuff.
No, but I mean, it's not the orgs that so the org does go to the tournament in a sense, right? But it's not, it's not Jack from C9 going to the event and playing, right? It's his players, right? So they're the people that are spending 9 to 10 hours a day, or as much as probably 14 hours a day involved in this tournament, and those accommodations, like, if they're, so most of this is probably, most of the time the accommodations are probably fine, right? Every once in a while, there's something abysmal that happens, and that's, I think, what is trying to be avoided, right? There's like a minimum standard, And I think that's kind of what the CSPPA is hinting at with collective bargaining, is having some sort of minimum standard for, like, these are things that just have to happen, right? And it's a little less concerning to me than talking about, trying to get more money out of the TOs or other things like that. But
So what if the CSPPA decides to use like soundproof booths? And, like they say that we want tournament organizers to use soundproof booths. Do you think that, like, this is where it gets really hard for me, right? Is things like that.
why?
Like why is that a player's decision?
Well, I'm going to step in because I
Yeah.
haven't really said anything in a while.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, like I was saying earlier, you gotta it's delineated between the 3 different groups, and this, like, with CS, it's a little bit weird because it's not like an NFL, but between the team, the players, and then whatever venue or whatever happens to be organizing the specific tournament. So, if the players want soundproof booths for a good reason, then yes, they should be bargaining for that. And if there's not a good reason, then maybe it's not their responsibility and they shouldn't be. But, like, if it's not something that they care about, they probably aren't going to try and bargain for it. I'm not really sure.
Or if there isn't a clear
Right.
consensus.
Okay,
among-
so I agree with that, but what my point is, I guess, is it's like the player formed organization needs to have clear boundaries of what it is, like who it is and isn't able to bully around, especially in like grassroots or like because you brought this up, Kevin. You're the one who said, like, so what if they just start bullying it and it causes damage?
Yeah.
Like, what if it's a damaging thing?
Mhm.
Like, it's one of those things where this is why I'm trying to say, like, it shouldn't be the players that should be able to do anything to the organizers, because it's one of those things where it's like the ultimate thing of, like, not if like a tournament does a bad job is for no big organizations to go to the tournament.
Well, so let me ask you a question then. Is there a difference between the CSPPA going to orgs and then the orgs go to TOs? Like, is it that different?
Totally, because
Okay.
that I think that the organization has to be able to decide what is and isn't marketable along with the tournament organizers, because in those scenarios, like, okay, so the players are getting paid their contract salaries either way, whether they go to these tournaments or not.
Mm-hmm.
And their performance at these tournaments is irrelevant, basically, to their income. Like, it is completely optional for
Well-
organizations to attend these events, as far as the organization is concerned. So,
I don't know about that. I mean, I think that there's
what
definitely
do you mean?
there's definitely a big part of an organization's value is
No, I'm not saying that's not the case, but I'm saying, like, if the organization could take the financial hit if they wanted to from not going to certain tournaments.
okay.
Right. So one of the things is that both of these people have to make money. So if the tournament organizers don't make money, there's no tournament. If the organization doesn't make money, there's no organization. So the players have their representation to their organizations, and the organizations have to decide, along with the tournament organizers, what's going to be profitable for both of them. Because, for instance, like, if they are going to sell less tickets to an event because there are soundproof booths, and the players want soundproof booths, like, I don't think that should be a player-made decision. Like, if the players go to their organizations that they've signed contracts with, and they want to make it part of their contract that they'll only play in soundproof booths, fine. But I just don't see. I don't see where the players should have an impact specifically on the two organizing bodies' bottom lines. That really doesn't like.
Well, the question is,
The
if it
tournament
does
doesn't really affect them.
If it does affect them, they should have the decision. Like, what would soundproof booths accomplish for the players? Like, why would they?
Like the argument for them would, I guess, be like quote unquote like better performance.
But wouldn't that be
Because
something
you can
that
perform better?
the teams would care about then?
Well, and the
as
TOs
well?
because the quality of Counter Strike increases, I guess.
It seems like that would just be something that everybody
well,
would want.
well, but
No, I
well,
disagree.
Well, in reality, a lot of players say that, especially in more loud arenas when the crowds are bigger, that they don't actually do anything. They don't like significantly lower the amount of sound, right?
Well, not only that, but it's just it's like, for instance, would going to a basketball game feel like the same experience if the players on the court were encased so they couldn't hear the crowd cheer? Like I don't.
Yeah, I get what
like,
you're saying.
Well,
that's
we're on
the
a little bit of a
argument
non
against it.
sequitur.
But the point is that like I'm not trying to make an argument here or there, but what I'm trying to say is that like the tournament organizer should be the one that decides whether or not that drives more sales for them.
Well, no, and they should. That's the point of bargaining. If the players, if it's that big of a deal, they go to the tournament organizers and say like, "Hey, we really want soundproof booths," and the tournament organizer is gonna be like, "Well, look, like, we can't afford it, or we can, but we're gonna cut, a third of the prize winnings or something," which I know isn't that big of a deal, but maybe that'll affect the TOs, or not the TOs, sorry, the team leaders or the organizations, and they'll be like, "Hey, look, like, we kind of like." It's not a huge source of our income, but cutting out like $1 million from a prize pool, decent amount, like we don't want to do that. So then it creates leverage that all three sides have to then go at each other. And if it's a big enough deal to the players, like they might keep pushing for it, and then the TO might be like, okay, we'll take that cut, and then the organizations are going to have to suffer for the loss of earnings
I think
and something.
I
But
think-
it's supposed to be a back and forth.
Yeah, I think one of the most the highest areas of contention though is always going to be surrounding something like the major, and one thing we haven't touched on yet is at least as far as things that players could aggregate for is certain formats to be played, right? So, for instance, players could CSPPA could come out and say that even if it's just an advisory, right? They could say that we prefer to play it, and like if we have to choose between tournaments, CSPPA players are committing to choose tournaments that use this format, right? To try to heighten the competitive integrity and stuff like that. Because right now the major system especially is kind of a joke with the way that it's structured and the way that people qualify for it. It's really messed up because. And that is a lot of money for those organizations, right? And this is why it's going to be a point of contention. And the CSPPA, I'm sure, will get involved at some point if they start collective bargaining with Valve directly, because Valve sponsors the majors, and they have a lot of say over what goes on, right? And this may end up affecting the bids that companies give to Valve for hosting majors. ESL, I believe, just got announced for the January or the first major of 2019. Don't know too many more details about that, but that's exciting. Anyway, so like with something like sticker money, right? If your org gets to qualify for the major, it's an automatic check, right? For a boatload of cash that you're going to get just handed to you. So how do you think that factors into how players and orgs are going to have to try and negotiate with things like Valve at the major?
I think this is why I don't like the players having so much influence in the scenarios, is that it's too many. It's like the too many cooks thing. Like right now, you have, if you're going to bring Valve into it now, you have like 4 or 5, like I'm losing track of all the webs that you have to go through of people like pulling back and forth of points of power. And again, like it's a problem because the leagues aren't run by the organizer, right?
Yeah.
This is why sports is so much better in the way it's set up.
Sometimes they are. So like ECS and EPL, right? They're run by TOs.
No, but they're not run by Valve.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Gotcha.
So now you're saying with like the majors, you
Yeah.
like pull Valve in,
Yeah.
and like this is why I like it with I like just like the the orgs talking like in negotiation when it comes to the financials.
Yeah.
Because the players don't understand what is going to affect their salaries, and so if the orgs can actually tell them, like, yeah, this is like making this decision is going to affect your salary by this much from us, then the players can make that decision, and then the organization can make the decision like to the TOs. Like, I think it's just like a chain of command type thing is more what I'm trying to establish.
Sure.
Not that the players shouldn't have a say in what's going on, but more just like if there's all these conflicting bodies pulling in a direction, like not everybody understands what needs to happen. So it's like I think that it's like it works a lot better in a scenario like Riot's is set up, but if the players just weren't represented also by Riot.
Yeah, Publius, hit this real quick, and then I'm going to say something.
Okay. Well, like I agree with you. I don't like the way that Counter-Strike is set up as an esport. I think that's a problem in of itself. But I think the players'
That's
union
another
is
episode.
fine. Yes, exactly.
Come back
Like
next
the
time.
players' union itself is because all of these competing interests already exist. But right now, it's not the players are coming together. Like they don't have a collective standpoint. It's they're speaking out as individuals, and they have no power. Like setting up a union doesn't like all of a sudden give them this like incredible amount of power where they can just bully over Valve and bully over their TOs and bully over their orgs, but it just gives them a way to like stand up together to give them a voice at the table. It gives them a way to like pressure their org to tell them like why their salary is this much and how much a decision would affect them by, so they can then make decisions based off of that. Well, like setting up the union itself doesn't really do anything to either harm CSGO as a sport or force Valve's hand or force TO's hands. All it does is give the players a way to collectivize. Now that's like it. Like I said, like all this tangled web is already there. This just gives one of the most underrepresented groups a bit more representation.
Now, I was going to ask for concluding statements, but that was actually a pretty darn good one. I don't know if you have anything to add. We are closing in on an hour here. So, Publius, I'll kick it back to you for a couple more seconds. Anything else you want to say? What do you... so, obviously, I believe you still think that this is a fantastic direction for the industry.
Yeah. I think that the industry as a whole needs to move in this direction, and I hope to see it succeed.
Savage, how about you? Any conclusory remarks?
Yeah, I think that what you said is a good point. Like all of those things do still exist. I think that one of the problems right now, and perhaps the topic that we'll do for the next show, but I'm not gonna obviously decide that now. But it would be something to at least something to touch on is like the way that these things are set up is really important. Like the way that the esports organizations run themselves, like it's important to have checks in certain areas, like we bring up with Riot all the time. Like nobody's checking them in any scenario, whereas like I do like the thing of grassroots esports too, where the players have a lot more say. Like in the FGC, everything is built by the players for the most part. Like there's very, very little actual circuitry by developers. And that gives pretty much all decisions to be made by players. Now, that can be a really good or a bad thing. Like there's a lot of competing interests on like what time limit should be, or like how many stocks in Smash, or like anything like that. And so when it is player organized, it can get kind of rough because then sometimes there's no pushback. So I don't know. I think that yeah, I think it's a good thing to form this organization in general, like player formed unions and that kind of thing. I think it is a good thing in general. I hope that we don't see any negative things come out of it in the future.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the thing to look for. Is I would say that I'm cautiously optimistic. There are some things that make me a little nervous, and I definitely recognize the fragility of esports right now. Right, it's still in the industry in general is still in a very vulnerable space. Video games aren't going anywhere. You know, competitive leagues and tournaments for video games, we don't know what the long-term future is. I will say, though, that from a player perspective, this is probably a step in the right direction, trying to get people fair contracts and good or adequate treatment by other players in the industry. So once again, Publius, Savage, thank you guys very much for coming on this show with me. We are going to send it out here. I believe we're going to start trying to do. What are we going to shoot for, guys? Are we shooting for bi-weekly, weekly, monthly? When can people expect the next episode?
I'm here all week.
All right.
We'll figure it
join us
out.
back in 15 minutes. We'll no. All right. Yeah. So anyway, if you want to know more about the show, I think I'm going to start doing hashtag podcast noir. So I will be tweeting out. You can follow that hashtag. You can follow me on Twitter. We also cast CSGO, myself and Savage. Follow Publius on Twitter. And you will get updates about the show topics in the future. Anything else to say, guys, before I send it off?
We all love you.
Just thanks for having me.
Thanks for that, ASMR Savage. And with that, guys, we are signing off. Once again, episode 4, Podcast Noir. We made it happen. 10 months. Doesn't even matter. Have a good night, everybody.